Hi guys, how are you? So nice to connect to you. So today we're going to be talking about a topic that I personally find very informative and also important. And this is going to be why calling in angels, archangels, spirit guides is detrimental. So I'm just going to quote from a blog that I had written on my website right before the weekend, and I'll put the blog post below in the video description too, by the way. And basically, I think this topic is so important because I still get so many comments on this channel for whatever reason. I know there are a lot of like newer people coming in, especially with the reviews and everything, but I do get a lot of comments where people are just like, oh, I asked my higher self. Oh, I asked my spirit guides. Oh, I asked my ancestors. Oh, I asked my deceased grandmother, all those things. So it's very important to kind of go through these topics. And the reason for that is because you're basically working with random astral entities that you don't really want to work with overall to begin with. So why is calling in all these entities detrimental? What I want to emphasize is the New Age and religion, and also other belief systems like Buddhism, possibly like Islam, Judaism, all of those other religious beliefs, they like to promote calling in all kinds of entities. And also when you go to like Indian cultures or Indian religions, they have all these gods and goddesses that they call in. But specifically the New Age trap and religion, they want you to rely on these entities instead of just being a powerful soul and being yourself and using your own powers and capabilities. And some of those entities are so-called angels, archangels, and in the New Age specifically, the entities are called spirit guides, ancestors, higher self, and other things that are always a good one to follow, right? So when people talk about spirit guides, I always like to call them spirit misguides because I myself have stories to tell how I was misled continuously over a period of several months, if not even years, by these so-called guides or astral entities, which at this point, I'm not even sure what exactly they were, like what kind of AI they were. And after these experiences I have personally made and also seen in many others, including my clients, I label those entities now as mischievous. So some people here on YouTube like to say they're all bad, you know, they're all this and that, but I'm going to say they're not all extremely bad or extremely negative the way others like to make them out to be. Some of them, and I would say a lot of these entities in the astral, they're about as misled as you and possibly, you know, just us, all of us. They want to have fun by giving people wrong or dubious advice and basically see how your life is being ruined in the process of following that advice, right? So I personally saw it in my own life where I was being misguided over several months when I was abroad, and I kept getting advice to do this, to do that. And at the end of the day, it really almost ruined my life. So I personally know very well what it feels like to have your life ruined by these so-called spirit misguides. It's important to point out that none of these entities, including angels, archangels, all of those, including your ancestors too, can get you out of the matrix. That in and of itself should probably give you a good idea of how little you need to rely on them. So you can sit here all day long, meditate, pray on these entities, whatever it is you want to do. But at the end of the day, they can't help you. If they were already outside of this matrix, which I am assuming you and I want to get out of, obviously, if they were already way outside of whatever we are in right now, you wouldn't even be communicating to them in that way, okay? So this is why they can also be labeled as false white light beings or false white light entities. Going down that rabbit hole will just loop you straight back into this reality and perhaps even keep you here for eons to come. So specifically in terms of you going down that false white light tunnel and everything, which I discussed in a different video. So let's just start out with angels. Are they AI entities or saviors? From what I've gotten so far, angels are AI, as basic as it sounds. So I had a few videos on my old channel, which you can see on Odyssey. I think if you just give in some terms, But basically, angels are AI. Religion and the New Age like to emphasize angels, and it's interesting that both of these cult-like belief systems actually believe in the same thing for once. But then again, religion and the New Age are also interested in ascension or salvation and a form of heaven or new earth. These concepts are essentially the same, but just labeled different in those beliefs. Perhaps I'm going to do a different video on that because there is this overlap between both Christian religion and New Age, where they're basically talking about, okay, yeah, we're going to ascend to something greater after this lifetime, and we have to be good in this lifetime to make it there. And it's one and the same belief system. Whether or not angels were created during the ancient Atlantis, meaning the Atlantis we're actually still in, because time in and of itself has been stretched and programmed by AI, and we have completely lost ourselves in it. You know, this is also why some people believe 1,000 years of our history were erased or added, and for others, it's not necessarily true. So whether they were created during that Atlantis that we're kind of still in, and that's kind of still playing out in our lives, or whether or not they were created beforehand is up for debate. And I myself still want to read on that too. But angels are therefore AI entities which somehow came about. It's very well possible that they came about similar to clones and soulless beings, you know, call them NPCs, call them robots, call them robotoids, whatever you want to call them, to keep the original souls, meaning the walking gods, some company. So some of these soulless beings came about because the souls that were actual gods, you know, it's like all these stories about the gods that fell from the heavens and came to earth and everything. Those are souls, right? Like some of them are giants, some of them not. But basically those souls created these soulless beings, like these AI fill-in characters, background characters, to kind of keep them company so that they're not as lonely, because it was such a huge mass to cover and you still have a lot of room. But basically, it does tend to get lonely on this earth realm, so it would make sense to a certain degree why they would create angels in that sense too. But it's also possible, and I kind of get, there's a lot of possibilities how angels could have been created. It's possible that the archangels created some of these angels too, or that somehow they're related to like the Nephilims, they're related to the fallen angels. Like it's very hard to read on all of this because there's so many psychic blocks around it, but it feels just a mix of everything, that some were created maybe by the souls or the walking gods, some were created by the archangels for sure, and some were created somehow in between by, you know, Satan or Lucifer or whatever, which that entire story is so twisted in and of itself, right? Everything's just inverted, like I already say in a lot of other videos. But either way, angels are astral entities. They're made by AI, and they are AI. They therefore cannot help you or give you much advice. And if they do, there will almost always be a cost or price tag attached to it somehow. And what I mean by that, because I've seen it with other people, especially people who are calling in these angels, it doesn't matter if they were religious or New Age, by the way, but there's always a form of sacrifice. And this sacrifice can be anything. It can be a pet, it can be a loved one, you know, all of a sudden they're falling ill or even dying when these angels are being called in profusely. So I even know this one person who had one of their parents pass away after working with angels almost their entire life, even, you know. So it was basically, they had worked, well, not their entire life, but they had worked with them for like 5 or 10 years or whatever, and they basically lost one of their parents, and one of those, you know, call it freak out. I mean, I don't know, it was just such a weird thing where they're like, okay, now we're going to call in even more angels to kind of help my own parents and this and that. And of course the parent passed away, and I was like, I'm pretty sure the parent would have kind of made it even had there been like no angels involved in it. But obviously it's very hard to prove those things. It's just my own intuition that kind of tells me that. But I've also seen like just pets all of a sudden, you know, kind of just dying, even though they were still going to make it. So there's a lot that goes into this. I'm not saying this to scare you, by the way, but I've seen it happen in a lot of people's lives. And all of a sudden, another thing that happens is their life just goes downhill or to hell after working with these entities, and there was always a major sacrifice involved somehow. There are others out there that point out how the word angel can also mean angle. So you just kind of put the words a bit different. So it's like ANGLE, meaning showcasing a different angle to this reality, not necessarily being good or bad, just neutral, meaning if they're neutral, why do you even need them, right? So words do have power, and they can produce a certain reality of their own, and they can also produce spells in our reality. So it's important to dissect those words and see this matter from that viewpoint as well. And I do want to say, when I was writing out my blog post, especially when I was writing the archangels, there was always the archangel that came through, which I thought was very interesting. So what about archangels? Misguided and misled themselves. The archangels exist both in religion and the New Age too. And what I found out is that what most people are communicating with or calling in from the astral are rarely the archangels. And if they are somehow calling in an aspect of, let's just say, Archangel Michael, I feel it's an imprint somehow. And I know people, I've worked with people here in New York City and everything over these past, I don't know, since 2014 on. I've worked with people who were into sound healing, who called in Archangel Michael. I worked with people, there was usually always Archangel Michael. I do want to point that out. So Archangel Michael is a huge one. Also, people in the military like to rely on him sometimes. But it's basically, whenever they were calling him in, there was this super angry energy all of a sudden when we were in a form of a session or an event or whatever. And I always picked up on, first of all, I did pick up on that color blue for sure. So they kind of pushed the color blue on Archangel Michael. But I always picked up on this super angry energy. And this is way before I was even really into any of this. I was like, why, whenever these people call in Archangel Michael, is it super angry in here? And even the people who called him in sometimes appeared really angry. So for me, that was like, I don't ever want to work with Archangel anything. I don't care if it's Archangel Raphael or Michael or whatever. Just leave him out of my life. That's kind of what I got. And this is before I was even doing any shamanic healings or whatever. I kind of always felt there was something off with that. So I feel if they are kind of calling them in somehow, they're calling it an entirely different astral entity, meaning just like a gray or some interdimensional being that kind of disguises themselves as it, similar to the angels, right? So they're calling in this entity who likes to disguise themselves as such, and similar goes to the Ascended Masters too, by the way. None of these actually exist, at least not in the astral realm or 4D ascension realm, whatever the New Age even pushes these days. But what I've gotten so far is actually a lot of these archangels, they're incarnated themselves nowadays. And I feel some of them actually, I do feel are African American. I do want to point that out. So if you want to go down the ethnicity route, I kind of got that with Archangel Michael, and also well, I don't know if Nathaniel's an archangel, but kind of like ascended angel Nathaniel, whatever. So I kind of got that those could very well be African Americans nowadays. Why people choose certain ethnicities over others, I'm not sure. There must be a story behind that too. But I also feel that a lot of these archangels, wherever they are incarnated, they have this huge connection to music. So they could be into music. They could be something like, let's just say, a DJ or some musician or whatever. And possibly Archangel Raphael would be very much into languages, or kind of like very much into the arts, like cultural shows, music, languages, arts, like Broadway shows, those kind of things. So all of these so-called archangels have quite an angry energy to them too, even when they are incarnated. Let's just say you're like on the phone with one of those, just as an example, and they're like super angry. They could probably make your glass shatter in your hand, that type of angry. So I do think some of them have these superpowers in terms of they can move objects somehow without really knowing they can, but so can we. So we've kind of just forgotten about it. We're so kept down in this reality where we've really forgotten about, like, everything's energy. Our thoughts create our energy. Our thoughts create a reality, which is also why you can basically manifest a lot of things into your life. Also the negative, obviously, because the matrix control has pushed so much negativity onto us that it's almost impossible to consciously create something else. And so you're always animated to turn off your news and everything, at least from my standpoint, because you don't want that type of reality in your world at all. You want a different type of reality, at least if you want the positive reality in your world. And I'm not saying ignore all the negative that's happening in the world, absolutely not, but there are different aspects to this world. And so you want to get rid of, anger, you want to get rid of all those emotions, which most of them are psychic attacks anyhow, like all those negative thoughts, as already discussed in a different video. Okay, back to these archangels, ascended masters. When working with other healers who would call them in regularly during sound healings or other sessions, Archangel Michael in particular would always be the most aggressive and angriest of all. I therefore concluded that the astral entity connected to this being, so even if it was an imprint or if it was a completely different entity disguising themselves as Archangel Michael, that this would be an extremely negative one, and they would have the capability to really mess up your life, people's lives in general. The incarnated versions of these archangels would perhaps also be quite angry, depending on the situation, but it's also possible they would not fall as much for the current thing that's been going on in the world for the past 3 years. I like to call it the sham. However, when incarnated here, we have that veil over us. We're being mind wiped. We're in amnesia, call it whatever. So they're going to be about as misled and misguided as you and I when it comes to that. And certainly not an entity you want to rely on to get out of here or to even take advice from. And there's always a question, what about the Ascended Masters, saints, and Jesus? Similar goes with the Ascended Masters. So Jesus is not Sananda. Mary Magdalene is not Sophia, or whatever the New Age really likes to push these days. There was an incarnated person that you would call Jesus, or it's more like Jeshua than Joseph, okay? There was also Miriam of Magdala, who was incarnated, and Jesus and Mary Magdalene were a couple. They had at least 2 children, if not even more together. They were incarnated over and over again over many lifetimes, and they're possibly still incarnated nowadays, of course. This is really, I feel this is really the lifetime. A lot of people, a lot of powerful souls are coming back, and it's for a reason, but it's not for the same reason the New Age wants you to believe. Let's put it that way. So anyhow, Jesus is not an ascended master. Mary Magdalene is not an ascended master. They would be about as mind wiped as you and I in this reality, and possibly even worse. A lot of these powerful souls, let's just take Caesar, Gaius Julius Caesar, or Alexander the Great as an example, because those are the ones that tend to not trigger as many truthers as much. All of these existed, but they were powerful. These are powerful beings. If you hear about them in history books, there's a reason for that. Like, they were powerful souls. They would be about as mind wiped as everyone else right now, and they would possibly be even more dumbed down and made to forget than others. I see visions every time I tap into this one. I don't know if it was Caesar or a different one, but when I tap into their energy, I always see that some part of their astral body or whatever is kind of kept down. They have some pyramid structure somewhere. I don't know if it's like below in the hell realm, or if it's kind of like down below the Antarctic or whatever, but they're always kept down in these pyramid structures, and their soul is literally kept in this super duper hyper hypnosis. And also there's a lot of entities around them guarding that. So just another thing to consider, in case you've seen my other videos on, how we're basically being trapped here and how our soul is kept in all these like structures, meaning underneath the ice and all of that too. So most of the saints were not very saint-like to begin with. I think we had St. Patrick's Day like 2 years ago. I kind of dissected St. Patrick's Day and how St. Patrick was actually not very saint-like at all. But most were pretty ordinary people with a conscience who perhaps did something a normal person did back in the days, or maybe they even stood up a little bit to society, like a tiny bit more than anyone else around them. Because keep in mind, a lot of people around us are NPCs or like soulless characters. They really don't matter. Like, we've really seen that over these past 3 years, how people are just mindlessly following an agenda and this and that. It wouldn't be any different 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. But on the other hand, some of these saints were also quite cruel. Okay, so if you want to go through the entire saints and what they've done, I don't know if it was Saint Brendan or whatever. Like, yeah, I come across these saints because I walk past some churches and there's always some new something. Oh, today's this and this saint day, and I'm like, wow. I'm going to look up what this person did, and I think it was Saint Brendan. I'm not sure, but one of them really wasn't that great. They were pushed through the religious movement, which follows an agenda of disempowerment in and of itself. These so-called saints are also most likely incarnated in the recycling trap nowadays, and they're just trying to figure out their way through it, or perhaps are kept down to such a degree that it's almost impossible for them to even wake up from the gazillions of deceptions thrown at them from day one. Saint Germain may be a perfect example of this. So I strongly believe Saint Germain is actually around Austria, Italy right now. I do think he's incarnated. I think he has a huge connection to languages for sure. I also think he has a huge connection to the arts. And I think he's kind of in that area where, you know, because Vienna, Austria used to be like this huge cultural epicenter of everything back in the days. So I think he would probably be drawn to that area. I kind of got, there's like this Italy connection too. A lot of people have this Italy connection because Italy used to be just like the center for a lot of things back in the days too. In France as well. It's also important to note that most of these saint days are called feast days. And it makes you wonder if the astral entities are using the day to feast off people's energies during those times of year. The Mary Magdalene feast day is a good example for that. Everyone, well, not everyone, a lot of people are pushing it around July 22nd, which that wasn't her birthday really. There are a lot of theories on her birthday. I'm not sure I actually disclosed her birthday yet or if I'm going to do it in a separate video. But basically, that's a huge example of it. Also, you know, intentions open up portals. So portals let through dubious energies and entities. This is also why mass meditations and the Lionsgate portal, which both contains the gate and the portal word in it, by the way, are nothing else than a feast time for the darker agenda. So I'm going to have at least 2 or 3 videos closer to the summer on the Lionsgate portal and how it's a huge deception, how the dates don't even add up, and how nothing really aligns during that time at all. But basically, the Lionsgate portal is one that really triggers a lot of New Agers because they're so mind-washed over these 5+ years that they can't believe how their energy is being siphoned from them. Like, it's basically just a huge energy harvest during that time. And a lot of these huge channelers like to push it too. So there's always going to be a reason for that, by the way. Spirit misguides can mislead you for years to come. So spirit guides and the higher self, 2 big concepts of the new age. I myself can tell stories of how I was grossly misled during my Australia times for 6 months straight. And this is back in 2019. People who were still on my old channel, I think you heard some stories, but I might make separate videos on it. You know, it's if I had not had the support network or family or friends or relatives to rely on, I probably would have ended up homeless. And what I actually find worse than that, in a very bad mental health condition a few months into my trip overseas. But luckily, I had a very good friend. She wasn't in Australia. She was actually in India at that time, who checked in on me and my mental health like every single day through the Messenger app, through WhatsApp, through whatever. And if I had not had her and a few other people in my life who I could just kind of rely on, I'm actually not sure if I would have made it through that time. That's how bad it was. That's how bad I was being targeted. And that's how bad I myself was actually still in the New Age psyop, where I was like, but my guides told me to do this and go here and do that. And so for me, it was a huge learning curve to who I can trust, because a lot of friends actually fell away during that time, which is perfectly fine. But I actually was able to trust people in my life where I was like, wow, this is crazy, who you really know you can rely on during times like that. And you really start, you know, honoring that too. I mean, you really start just seeing it for what it is as well. But basically, you know, it's they can put you through the worst depression. They can put you through suicidal thoughts, all of that, because these are just mischievous entities who don't care about your life after all. You are the main player of your video game, not your spirit misguides or guides. And you have to wonder yourself why all of a sudden these word entities around you, which the New Age pushes, obviously, why they are around you, why do they have to give you advice when you actually know better than anyone else around you what's going on, right? So I was able to gather my senses. I was able financially to book a flight back home and rest for a few months. That was also a time where I was actually not giving any sessions, all of that. Some people may recall that, at least my old time followers. But other people may not have that particular support network to fall back onto, and that mental and emotional support, because it's a big one. It's a big one to have that. And I've heard stories of how some people turned bankrupt or broken by following the advice of their spirit guides. I had people who were like, they were 10,000 plus in debt, if not even more. Others turned almost insane by keep following the path their guides told them to follow until they finally realized it was ruining their lives. There's this one story about this one cult in Germany where 3 people committed suicide or whatever by following advice from these dubious entities. So it can get really serious. It's not just, oh, let's just call in these entities, let's just see what they have to say. It can get really serious for some people. And this is also why you need to talk about it, because it's becoming bigger and bigger, with the New Age becoming bigger and bigger too. Relying on outside entities who mislabel themselves as guides in the astral is about as ludicrous as everything else we have discussed above. Random astral entities will disguise themselves as your grandmother or your spirit guide or your power animal or your Arcturian, Pleiadian, alien, whatever guide, who will have your back. This is just not the case. The false high you're going to get from channeling these entities rarely lasts very long. Okay. And then when it fades, you often have to keep coming back for more and more and more until you're at a point where you don't even know whose advice to follow and why. And this is also when you might run across people who aren't really, who don't really have the best of heart in their mind. And I came across that too. I had a person who was basically like, oh, I think you should commit suicide. And I'm like, are you crazy? And that's kind of when I woke up too, when I had like all these random people around me who in my field who were trying to give me advice. And I'm like, something's going on here. Like they really want to suicide me out of the program right now. And I have to really fall back onto people I know I can trust. And luckily I had those, but I know with other people, they don't necessarily have those. So just to give you like a little bit of an overview of that. This is also what I like to call the state of total disempowerment. So people might keep coming back over and over again to their psychics, to their healers or whatever. And they're like, hey, I need to get the same high that I got from our first session, or I need to come back for advice over and over again. I personally don't like to work on the same people over and over again. When mentoring, it's a little bit different, but especially with like psychic readings or shamanic healings, I like to do, maybe 1 session, maybe 2, but I don't like people to come over and over and over again. I want them to learn it on their own. And I basically want them to be empowered to do it on their own too. But I know with other healers, they kind of live off of people keep coming back over and over to them. And a lot of channelers who I dissect and criticize on this YouTube channel, they've kind of surpassed the state of total disempowerment. And it's important to point this out too. Oftentimes their energy is pretty horrendous and pretty angry, by the way. Simply empty and soulless. You see it in their eyes where it's like, it's just so empty, right? It makes you wonder what part of their life they sacrificed to be where they are now. Okay, so here's another concept. What about ancestors? They should know. In shamanism and in the New Age, it's common to promote the concept of ancestors, especially in shamanism. When I learned shamanic healing and everything, we definitely learned with, oh yeah, the ancestors know everything and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I never connected with the ancestors. I never connected with calling in these random entities that want to be ancestors. In none of my courses will you ever learn how to call any of that in, because I find it to be another false white light concept and another form of hopium. Hopium meaning just promoting the false hope over and over again. If our ancestors really knew more about this reality, do you think we would still be here? Honestly, if they knew how to get out of the matrix, we wouldn't be here. it's true that ancient knowledge is getting lost, okay? Especially from a naturopath standpoint, there were healthier and more effective ways to deal with disease and other things that's thrown at us these days from pharma, from medical personnel, and by science too. However, that ancient knowledge in and of itself does not elevate our ancestors or tribes to saint-like status, okay? And I also want to point out a lot of diseases such as Lyme disease, the types of cancers, everything we're dealing with nowadays, those did not necessarily exist 100, 200, 300 years ago. A lot of those diseases are created by another form of AI, and they're being thrown at us right now. So your ancestors wouldn't really know what to do with those anyhow, okay? Just want to point that out. Of course, they probably knew, I mean, yeah, cancer wasn't as prevalent as it was back then, so they probably knew how to work through those things, or it didn't even come up. But we're just living in such a different society after the industrialization period, especially, that, I mean, they wouldn't even know what to do in that case. You know, they wouldn't know how to cure you know, you having all these like computer related diseases and everything. So the Mayans, the Vikings, and other nations and tribes were among one of the most brutal out there. Did you actually know that the Mayans put their victims and captives under psychedelics for fun? And that these people who were under psychedelics had to find their way out of elaborate mazes and labyrinths? So anyone who's ever taken psychedelics in their life, you know that that's a death sentence for them, right? If you're under the influence of something like that, you know you can very well die when you just trip over a rock or you get lost like that in a maze or labyrinth, especially if you kind of have to defend yourself against like random animals that they put in and everything. Of course, there are way more brutal stories to tell, but that's just one of them. You know, like the Mayans in and of itself. I had a video on the Mayans on my old channel where I was like, the Mayans, the reason Mexico is so messed up right now is simply because of the Mayans, because they brought in that entire cartel energy, which now translates into cartel, but they were definitely not little saints that you want to worship. You don't want to follow the Mayan calendar, in my opinion. You don't want to follow anything they really say. You know, there's always going to be wisdoms that come up in different cultures and tribes, but for me personally, it's not convincing enough to kind of elevate them to the saint-like status. So what I've gotten so far is that our ancestors are not really around the way the New Age wants you to believe. A lot of our ancestors are reincarnated, or you're maybe even one of those ancestors reincarnated, because a lot of times it stays in the same bloodline. But land for sure carries energy and imprints of cultures, wars, and other things. So the ancestors you think you're connecting to in the astral are once again these random AI entities, not your deceased Viking, great, 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 a million times great grandfather or your Mayan ancestor. Souls are being recycled back into the recycling trap when they die. If they aren't, they most likely found their way out and they're not around. And I know this information can be very triggering and shocking for some, especially people who kind of follow the shamanic path and who kind of follow all these other shamans who are saying, oh yeah, ancestors know better and blah, blah. And oh, also the Native Americans know better and blah, blah. You know, the Native Americans here in the US actually slaughtered one another. Like the Navajo were slaves to other tribes, just to give an idea of the own brutality. And all the wars that were fought here on the American soil, the US American soil, also the Canadian one, there's a reason they were fought in those certain areas. It's because before that, there were most likely these Native American tribes that fought some wars, and before that, other tribes. So there's always a story behind it, and you need to follow the entire story, not just something that sounds pretty and that makes you feel good, okay? Because I personally know, you know, with the Navajo especially, like you go, like they were enslaved, especially around what you would call Colorado right now. So whatever tribe was around Colorado, they were just using the Navajo as Native American slaves or whatever you want to say, okay? I don't expect everyone to understand this unless you've experienced the things yourself, unless you've actually done your research, and you can confidently say, the New Age actually ruined your life and all of those things, because a lot of people who are my clients or who just in general are watching this channel, they can actually say that. You know, it's an awakening from the false awakening, so to speak. Like the New Age ruins people's lives, as hard as it is for people to understand that. Similar with religion, though. So the real question is, why are we being kept from discovering our own radiance and power? Why are we always animated to look outside of ourselves instead of finding that inner power within? None of these entities or anything you need to rely on, but your own intuition, your own inner knowing very well is. And this is also why it's so important to fine-tune it to the maximum extent that you can. And basically, when you follow these channelers or these huge channels that kind of just sit there and channel Valnek or all these other entities, they're never telling you, first of all, that you're able to do the same if you wanted to. They're not telling you that you actually have more power than any of those entities ever. So you have to ask yourself, why? Why are you being so kept down? Why is every single one of us always being so kept down, right? What's the agenda behind it? So in short, that's kind of what I wanted to discuss in this video. It got a bit longer than I wanted it to be, but I hope this kind of helps in discerning. And here's another angel picture right there. I hope you get something out of it. You can, definitely follow me and my website. My name is Laura from misleadinghealer.com. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for more videos to come, also for more blog posts to come. And I hope this was a powerful one. All right, you guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.